Hello, my name's Nathan. Thank you so much for watching. Since I have a YouTube channel now, I've realized that it has become necessary for me to establish the parameters that I'm working within whenever I am approaching any kind of piece of text. So this is just how I approach film and literature when it comes to criticism. How do I go about analyzing a book? How do I go about analyzing a film? Initially, I thought that this was going to be an unnecessary video. Like, I didn't even have the idea to make this kind of a video because it just seemed obvious to me what the rules are, because I'm not doing anything strange. I'm not doing anything other than a pretty orthodox approach that you would find in any academic institution. As far as I'm concerned, certainly if you're talking about post-secondary education, the way I approach things is nothing strange within a film studies department, within an English department, at any respectable institution. But then I've started thinking about all of the drama that exists out there between, within critical circles in general, of content creators who seem to have these, what I find to be needless and silly spats with other content creators, and a lot of this just seems very unnecessary to me. Now, I've been teaching for a while now. I think I'm in year 12 of teaching. Both I've taught at the college level, at the high school level, junior high, and kind of all over. I've realized I always have to establish the rules within my own classroom, and I guess I should probably do that for my channel as well. I've also kind of come to this realization that not everyone has had a good English teacher in high school. And I guess I was fortunate enough where I did have multiple English teachers who were really good at what they did. They established a really good classroom climate. And I guess I took that for granted because not everybody has had that experience. Really what I'm doing, I think kind of at the heart of it, is this is a defense of a liberal arts education. It's a defense of that approach to any kind of text. But I've also realized that a lot of people who are making videos on YouTube, a lot of people who are blogging, a lot of people who are on Twitter, they have not done that, which is fine. It's perfectly fine. But some of the things that I take for granted, I've realized other people don't take for granted. So I'll try to outline what some of those things are. First of all, analyzing literature, analyzing film, analyzing any text like that is not a zero-sum game. I cannot emphasize that enough. And the concept of a zero-sum game means that there's a finite amount of points that exist. And so imagine it this way. There are 100 points that exist. And if, let's say, you've got two different people who have different interpretations of a book or have very, very different reactions to a book. If you are operating under the rules that this is a zero-sum game, what's going to happen is you are going to think the only way that I can win points is by taking points away from my opponent, that it is a competitive approach to criticism. And this, I think, is really where you're getting a whole bunch of needless drama. This is not true. And this is kind of jumping down to my conclusion. We become richer when we have more interpretations. Things are just better when you've got multiple ways of analyzing a text. And just because you have one reaction to a text and I have a very different reaction doesn't mean that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. That is nonsense. And if you are right, so to speak, there are ways to know that you're right, that you're interpreting things in a pretty well-founded way. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. But my second point, analysis and criticism is not solving a riddle. A lot of people seem to think that approaching a film or approaching a piece of literature is exactly akin to solving a riddle. In that there is one correct answer out there, and that the author of it was so clever, was so smart that they gave you all the clues within there, and it is whoever is the quickest to the solution gets all the adulation. Whoever figures it out first gets all of the merit. And then we're supposed to look at that and say, wow, you were so smart. You were so clever. You got there first. You figured it out. You solved the mystery and you got to the solution before anybody else did. Bravo. I am in awe of your intellect. Analysis in literature is not like that at all. Just like I say, this is nothing groundbreaking. But if you're looking at, let's say, the study of Shakespeare, there continue to be new essays written all the time by respected academics about how you can approach one of his plays, one of his poems, or a whole variety of them, and how you can derive very rich and very different interpretations than we've had before. Like I say, this, if you've studied this formally, then this is obvious. But for a lot of people, I think they don't realize this. It's a competitive approach compared to a collaborative approach. And certainly in a good seminar, whether if you're fortunate enough to have a high school teacher who can set up a seminar environment, that's great. But definitely in a university, whether it's undergrad or in graduate school, if you can establish a good seminar environment, what that means is that everyone is eager for different interpretations to be pulled out, because that helps each person better understand how to appreciate the text. It is not treating it like there is one correct solution and whoever gets there first gets all the high fives and everyone else has to hang their head in shame, or they have to scream and berate that person for saying, no, you misinterpreted it. That's not the answer. I've got the answer. So I'm not interested in participating in that kind of approach whatsoever. Okay, so then what do? So I've said here two things that it's not. It is not a zero-sum game, and it is also not solving a riddle. So instead, what I'm proposing is that there's a couple things you can do. So you can use what is called literary theory. These are just theoretical lenses to apply to analysis. And what I mean by that is that you can look at any one text, and depending on how you look at it, you can draw out all kinds of different meanings. So I've had a couple interactions recently where I've been told that the meaning I drew out from a text was incorrect. And I know that it's not incorrect because this jumps down to my fourth point. The strength of an argument is directly tied to the level of textual support you have. And so I know that I am reaching a good interpretation because I say, look at all the textual evidence I have. So within the book, what about this? What about this? What about this? These are all the elements of the text that all justify my interpretation. That doesn't mean that somebody who has somebody who has a different interpretation is wrong. I don't even think that. When I come up with a good interpretation of a piece of literature, then I'm still not convinced. It's not like I feel like, there, I've done it. It's over. I don't have to think about this anymore. I figured out the answer. Far from it. That's really only the beginning. And so, I mean, if you're new to this, then this is a quick breakdown. You can approach a piece of literature through a bunch of different theoretical lenses. For instance, you could take a deconstructionist approach. You could take a psychoanalytical approach. You could take a feminist theory approach, a queer theory approach, a Marxist approach, or a new historicist approach. Any one of these is perfectly fine and perfectly valid, and there's a bunch more. And it's actually really fun when you try to do this. And I certainly get my students, when I'm teaching English, I get them to do this. I say, here's a piece of text. You got to try to come up with use different theoretical lenses. So it is essentially that. You're taking a lens, you're kind of putting it in between you and the text, and then you're saying, what happens when you look at the text through this lens? So if you have lenses over your eyes, let's say if you have rose-colored lenses, then that changes the way the world looks. It doesn't change the actual world itself, because the text in this metaphor, the text stays the same, but how you're looking at it changes depending on what the lens is that you're using. So you get all kinds of, to me, it makes interpretation so much more fun when you understand this. And certainly professors who have made a career of this, they often will choose one or two, usually not more than that, but one or two theoretical approaches with which they examine all kinds of texts. And it's because it is very difficult academic work to take that approach, to use different theoretical lenses and try to understand a whole bunch of different texts. That you can spend a very long time trying to do this, and you continue to pull out rich and varied interpretations. And so I don't ascribe to any one approach. I like using different ones. I've always enjoyed doing that. And really what I like to do is I like a book or a film that opens up all kinds of interpretive possibilities. This has nothing to do, I don't like the language of good and bad. It's a good book, it's a bad book. To me, it's an interesting book or not. And the more interesting it is, the more enjoyable I find it. And so those are kind of the first 4 points. My fifth point is that all analysis is tentative. Like, all of your conclusions are provisional. You have to become comfortable with uncertainty. And I think what ends up happening, and I see this happen a lot online, and I was kind of complaining about this on my podcast fairly recently, about how much I really kind of hate this approach of fan theories. And this might sound strange because I like theoretical approaches and literary theory and film theory. But to me, the problem with fan theories is that most people treat them as if it's a zero-sum game. Oh, you got there first. They solved the riddle because it is in the text. And part of the issue with that is I also think that they're using very definitive language. Many people who come up with theories like this. So it'll be something like saying, this film is about this. This character is this. Instead of, and it's a small change. You just have to say, this film can be read as, this character can be read as, or this character can be interpreted as. Again, I'm not trying to belittle anyone's intelligence, because this is nothing new. I'm not coming up with these ideas on my own. These are just the ground rules that you play by. And this is where I think a lot of the silly fighting and bickering is coming from, is that a lot of people don't seem to understand that. When somebody comes up with a totally different interpretation of a piece of literature than me, I actually am grateful for that. If they are justifying it with good evidence from the text. And really, I think that's the weakness of, I think, most fan theories. And most people who get very argumentative when they are getting into it with somebody, often what happens is they try to pull evidence from outside the text. They're like, I've never met anybody who's like that. It's like, okay, but that the text is the text. That's what happens within the text, though. So you can't say, well, your theory doesn't count because I've never met anybody like that. But I'm like, but the character in the book is like that. So you have to argue here. You can't take this argument and put it elsewhere and say that we're going to fight over here about something, to me, that is anecdotal. And it is invalid when it comes to interpreting this. Essentially, what I think good interpretation is doing, it is very similar to building a good court case. And what I mean by that is, you want to be able to have evidence. You want to have evidence that is valid. And how do you know that it's valid? Well, typically it's going to be valid because it's found within the text. You can point to authorial intent, although that is actually fairly controversial, but you can point to some degree to what did the author intend. I personally do not think that that is the be-all and end-all, but it can be helpful at times. But what you can't do is you can't have unsubstantiated claims. I don't want to hear conjecture. I don't want to have a bunch of hearsay. I don't want a bunch of arguments being thrown at me where you're no longer playing by the same rules, where you're saying that whatever life experience you have automatically allows you to interpret this book or this film in this particular way, as if your own life experience always has to be read into the story. And this is, to me, I just don't agree with that. The degree to which an author is successful is not the degree to which you can identify with a character. It is entirely possible to have characters who are very well established, very carefully drawn out, in which you can feel a whole bunch of empathy for them, but you don't identify with their plight whatsoever. That doesn't make it a bad book. That doesn't mean there's not believable characters, because fiction in general is not always trying to accurately depict the real world. And I hear a lot of criticism about texts like that, where they will say, well, it's bad because I've never met anybody like that. Okay, but that doesn't mean anything as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of different people in the world, and just because you personally have not met them does not mean that a writer who includes that type of a character in there is now a bad writer, because that doesn't fit with your own personal life experience. So I've got plenty more to say about this. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing with the channel. I am thinking about trying to do some kind of introductory lessons to literary theory, in part just for my own sake, because I really enjoy studying this. I really enjoy seeing what can happen when you take different theoretical approaches to different texts. And now that I'm not a student anymore, and I'm pretty much exclusively teaching, I miss doing that, and I feel like this might be a good opportunity. There's certainly plenty of people who are doing good content like that, and I'm not saying that I've done a better job or that I'm going to do a better job than anyone else out there. I just think that the conversation becomes better with more voices, and I think that the conversation becomes better when we collaborate, when we're all kind of talking, when we're all focused in on all of the fun that can be had when we are not in a constant competition to one-up each other when it comes to interpretation. And so that's pretty much it. That's really all that I wanted to say with this. Like I say, I'm going to have more on this topic as I kind of work through some of these ideas, because that's really just a breakdown of what I think the ground rules ought to be, and what they are on my channel. All right, I would love to hear your comments, so feel free to comment below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.